and welcome to the 9 News Business Buzz, where we take up what's happening in business, why it's important to you and our economy. I'm your host, Ryan Frazier, 9 News business expert and CEO of Frazier Global. As per usual, I am joined by Ed Sealover of the Colorado Chamber of Commerce and the editor of the Sum and Substance. Ed, how's it going?
It's going great, Ryan. I'm glad to be back again.
We've got some important topics to take up today. Let's get into this construction defects. As you know very well, construction defect laws have been blamed for deterring Colorado condo construction due to high risk of lawsuits. A new bill aims to reform these laws to make it easier for developers to build condos. Ed, what's the latest on this?
So the bill is moving through with surprising amounts of support, especially for a bill that died last year in the House. It looks like it's going to land on Governor Polis's desk and probably become law. It's the details that are still getting worked out. But the bill is interesting because what it does is it takes a new approach to this issue by essentially setting up a voluntary program into which builders can get that will give them more protection against lawsuits. It would cut down the time that you could file lawsuits. It will also require more things out of the lawsuit. You'd have to prove a lot more harm imminently than current lawsuits do, even to file them. In exchange for basically two things the builders would have to do. One, they'd have to have third-party inspectors on site reviewing their work and making sure that it is not defective while it's going on. And secondly, they would have to offer warranties that in the most extenuating circumstances would go out to 6 years for their products.
Now, we've heard many times in many headlines, the condo development has been at all-time lows in large part because of concerns over lawsuits. What are some of the arguments both for this and against this reform?
Well, it's a good point you bring up there. I mean, and that's why people should theoretically care about this, is because Colorado's current laws prevent condos from getting built. That's what builders say. And the reason that's important is that way back in the golden days of 2005, when 20% of the market was condos, they were typically the first home for young professionals and people coming up in the world. You couldn't afford a home, and that's, by the way, before we had the current home prices. Then you go to a condo, you build up your wealth, you live in that for a number of years, then you sell it before you move on to a single-family standalone home. Those aren't happening anymore, and because of that, it's harder for young professionals and young people in general to make their way into homeowning these days, and that is robbing a significant portion of our population of the opportunity to build the wealth they need to fully be adults. The proponents of this bill say, look, this is a chance to do that again. This is a chance to jumpstart that market, and we need to do anything we can to jumpstart that market. Now, the opponents are saying, whoa, whoa, whoa. Let's remember that homes are going to be the largest investment most people ever make. And if you are not able to take full legal recourse for problems you see in your home, then you are essentially spending money that you'll never get back if your builder does a shoddy job. They are less worried about this bill than those in years past, but they still say there's too much of a giveaway to builders here. You need more protections for homeowners in this.
Yeah, so here's how I hear what I hear what you said. So the proponents are saying we need more guardrails around this because otherwise this ease of suing and litigating is really going to kill any desire to move forward with building more condos. But that's kind of important if we want to have more people having access to affordable homes, condos being a part of that conversation. But the other side is saying, or at least what I would imagine they're saying, Ed, is that, hey, hold on, when there's legitimate issues or concerns, we need to have the ability for homeowners or future homeowners to still, take those issues to the courts to have them resolved, right?
Yeah, and you're not afraid to see them break out some of the worst case scenarios you see out there. People whose homes' foundations have shifted, giant cracks in the walls, water pouring down through the roof, and those are the ones that are meant to be protected by these laws. And I think everybody on both sides of this will agree with that. Who is in the middle here and what they're trying to prevent are the large number of lawsuits that have been filed when, say, a trial attorney will come in and find out there's not quite enough nails that are up to code. There should be 4 nails per each of these, and you've got 3. Or they will take a power washer to your window until it finally leaks, and they'll say, look, clearly this is ineffective too. This bill is saying that doesn't fly anymore. You have to actually prove harm or imminent harm from some of these problems or structural defects, not just, hey, we're missing code here, in order to move forward with these suits. And that's how they're going to cut down on the number of suits. And if you cut down on the number of lawsuits, they believe that they will lower the insurance prices because the risk of lawsuits policies won't be as great, and suddenly lower insurance prices, then you're going to get more builders interested in this submarket, and we'll see more than just 3% of new builds being condos in the future.
Yeah, so interesting. This issue's been around for so long, and it looks like it finally has a chance to pass. And I can tell you, as someone who's been in the business community for decades myself, I had so many conversations, not just about this issue, but the whole issue of litigation and how it stymies investment and the desire to do business in the first place. But at the same time, as a homeowner, as a husband, as a father, as someone who's in my community, I understand that tension, if you will, between protecting homeowners and encouraging development to address things like housing shortages. It sounds like we might just have a way forward with this bill, and it may very well pass this session.
Yes, but there's one holdup, and that is the people who aren't behind it yet are the builders. The builders are saying, wait a minute, I understand what you're doing, and we want to get there too, but there are a couple things about this bill that just aren't working yet. You're putting too much liability, for example, on the third-party inspectors, and they may not want to be a part of construction going forward. Or you are looking and saying, here's what you can't sue for, but those definitions are still too vague. So before there's this great kumbaya moment that we seem close to, there is likely more changes that are going to be needed to this bill.
Quickly, before we wrap up on this issue, Ed, any idea if it does pass, when we may start to see an increase in condo construction?
It's not going to be right away. You're not suddenly going to see 1 million condo projects going on.
Some people will be happy about that.
So, yes, but I think over time, the more construction projects that get built, you're going to have people who are going to be willing to jump into the market first. And the more that they do that without getting sued, then the more you're going to see more people getting in, and insurance prices are going to drop. I'd say it's probably a 5 to 7 year plan for building more condos.
Thanks for that, Ed. Now, we're hearing more and more these days about the talk of a potential national recession. Estimates by some have ranged from the probability of 35% to as high as 60% that we may enter a national recession, with some arguing, Ed, that we may very well be in a recession today. Ed, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how seriously should we be taking these fears, and what are some of the key indicators you look for as someone who represents the Colorado Chamber of Commerce?
Well, I'm not going to stray much from what economists in general look for when you talk about a recession. You're looking at lowering gross domestic product. You're looking at production falling off. You're looking at falling income. I can say for sure, looking just at Colorado's numbers, and I think, frankly, that's the way that we look at it more than as a national thing, we're not there yet. We are seeing slowing GDP, gross domestic product, right now in Colorado. In fact, we dropped from 10th in the country in 2023 to 39th in 2024. But it's still a growth. It's just a slower growth. Income is the same. We're not seeing the same spurts in income we've seen in recent years, but it's still growing, just at a slower rate. So right now, when you're looking at it, you're thinking, okay, we may be teetering on the edge. You know, what are these tariffs going to do to the confidence of the public, which is really going to be the indicator that's going to push businesses to decide whether they want to cut back production, whether it's going to make consumers cut back on their own spending. But luckily, we're not there yet.
Well, and you're right, though. We are starting to see some signs that should definitely raise people's early warning radars, as I'll say, in terms of we're seeing consumer confidence starting to slip. We'll have to see whether we have an increase in jobless claims or open jobs start declining, which will be also an indicator. You mentioned possible contraction of GDP over time, rising unemployment in general. But the challenge with recessions, right, is they're often difficult to predict with certainty, because there could be a big lag between economic indicators and the actual onset of a recession. Now, for our viewers, it's important to understand that when we do enter into a recession, it is the National Bureau of Economic Research who is actually responsible for determining when we are in a recession and when we are not. And so that organization will ultimately be the entity that will kind of make the call. But that said, Ed, with what's happening today, and there's so much uncertainty, so much volatility with the tariffs and the retaliatory tariffs, and the U.S. putting tariffs on China and some of our partners in really everyone. And then, you know, the China retaliating with tariffs, as well as Canada and the European Union members are coming together to say they're going to tariff the U.S. These types of uncertainties and the slowing stock market and the volatility that we're seeing there these days all are indicators that we may very well enter a recession unless some steps are taken to resolve these global concerns that are stymieing supply chain and causing many businesses, both nationally, globally, and for that matter, locally, to sit tight, which is one of the biggest challenges, right? When you think about being a business owner, when you have uncertainty, one of the things that you don't want is uncertainty. But when you have uncertainty, you're less likely to hire, you're less likely to invest or to grow your business, which means, oftentimes you face the very, very real possibility of starting to reduce headcount, so, in order to protect your business. And so if those things, that domino effect starts to happen, then I think we could very well find ourselves in a recessionary environment. But I think it's very important that, at least as it stands right now, we do not believe that we are in a recession today.
We don't, but it's all about the confidence, as you mentioned there. I mean, we may not be in a recession, but if enough consumers believe that their job is in jeopardy because we're heading toward a recession, they're going to pull back on their spending, and that's going to pull back on production, and that's going to cause businesses to pull back on hiring. It's really an ugly little system that brings about recessions, that brings about depressions. Obviously, we're nowhere near that. When you see that kind of reaction there. So I think what needs to be done is that the federal government, the state government as well, need to give confidence to consumers and to businesses. I mean, tax breaks are always a way to do that, even if they're not immediately put into place, to be able to say to consumers, you'll have more of your own money to keep and spend. That's a way to keep people out of recession. For businesses, it's a lot about regulations. That's particularly true on the state level here. Businesses are worried about some of the bills that are going through. These are bills we're probably going to talk about here in a little bit. Whether it's making it a lot easier to ding them for wage theft, or whether it's rising the cost of doing business by making it easier to unionize. Those are the kind of things that are going to make businesses shudder a little bit and cause them to pull back on their spending. I think it's important that the federal and state government think about that as they're thinking about potential regulations right now.
I think that's very important what you touch on. That is, state and local governments, in addition to state and local business leaders, all have to be at the table having these types of conversations as to what's happening with our local economy, what we can do to mitigate recessionary concerns in order to strengthen and bolster, or make us more resilient, so that we can ultimately come out of whatever's coming our way even stronger. That said, Ed, let's keep the topics moving here. The Colorado legislature is considering a number of bills that could significantly impact the state's business climate and economic development. Ed, you have been talking about this a lot on our show in terms of what's happening, the economic competitiveness of Colorado. So I know this is really near and dear into your heart. Now, we can't cover everything, so I want to specifically focus with you on what's happening today with respect to artificial intelligence in the workplace, as well as the workers' compensation doctor's choice issue that's kind of bubbling up at the state capitol.
Yeah, these are two of many bills that are really could be detrimental to economic development and to the business confidence that we discussed here. Let me start with artificial intelligence in the workplace. A bill at the legislature would make it a lot easier for whistleblowers to get protections if they see artificial intelligence being created that could have discriminatory effects on the people it's using, that could help to, determine somebody shouldn't be eligible for a job, shouldn't be eligible for some sort of health care, or could have detrimental effects to the public safety at large. This sounds good on the surface, and this is a bill that actually has bipartisan sponsorship. But when you look into it, these are protections that exist for no other industry. You don't even have to see something illegal going on to be able to report it and suddenly have protection against retaliation from your employers. I mean, that's true for most whistleblower bills. In fact, the most recent one that Colorado passed dealing with whistleblowers during the pandemic protected people who could say, look, there's something literally unsafe going on in my job here that's going to hurt the public health, and you get protections. I think this is going to have a detriment to society and public safety, and I'm going to report it. Why this matters is it's not just winsome to businesses to know that people can be going to the public and saying, I didn't like this interior process, but really artificial intelligence is a booming segment of the economy right now. It's small, but it's growing. And this is going to say to artificial intelligence developers, many believe, don't come here. You know what? Nobody has a law in place like this. If we pass this, suddenly you're going to be under conditions that make it a lot easier for you to get sued. And suddenly Silicon Valley and Austin and other areas are saying, that's great, come here and I'll tell you why you don't want to go to Colorado. That's why we need to talk about that in the sense of economic development.
Now, along those lines, whenever I hear, these new laws or new regulations, right, I'm always like, oh, okay, here we go again. But sometimes they're needed, as we've discussed. There are sensible regulations that are needed for every industry.
Absolutely.
But I do wonder, has there been any sort of assessment of the economic impact of this legislation? Are the proponents suggesting that somehow this is good for Colorado's economy? Obviously, the folks who oppose this believe it's bad. It will keep AI investment and development away from the state. But has there been any sort of discussion around how this could impact the state economically?
No, the proponents are talking about this more from just a public safety standpoint. It is artificial intelligence is being, grown and developed faster than we know how to do with it. And that's, I think, very true. But they're talking about it in terms of protections, not in terms of economics. And I think that's how you see a lot of these arguments break down is it good for safety? Or is it good for economics, when I think there probably is actually more of a middle road there?
Yeah, now what about this worker comp with the doctor's choice?
Okay, this is an esoteric bill, but it's one that actually is very important. Right now, if you get injured on the job, your employer will hand you a list of 4 potential doctors you can go see for your recovery. Generally, these are doctors that have been vetted by your employer. These are doctors with great experience working with workers' comp patients, and that are going to speed you to getting back on the job. A new bill that is moving through the legislature would say, no, you as the employee, get to choose from any doctor in the state who is certified to work on workers' comp, which is more than 1,100 of them statewide. Businesses are looking at this saying, this is not a good idea for several reasons. One, do you really want to hand your employees, who have probably never dealt with the workers' comp system before, a list of 1,100 doctors and say, good luck, I hope you find the right one? Secondly, this bill also allows employees to switch doctors at any point they don't like their service. Now, that can be very important in a number of cases where you just don't agree with your doctors. But there's a great worry that this is also going to allow employees who are progressing to getting back to work to say, no, I want to switch doctors and get this rechecked again here, and still be able to get paid for not being at work through the workers' compensation system. This is not a theoretical. We've seen a number of cases of this that have gone through in the past. And that's why employers are so worried about this, because especially for smaller firms, when you have somebody who's out on workers' compensation, getting the care that they absolutely need, that means that they're not contributing to your business, you're down an employee, and if you're going to hire in their place, that's a lot of money, especially for small businesses to spend to bring someone in and to train them for limited periods of time as well. So this is a bill about productivity that employers believe will ding them if it goes through in its current state.
Yeah, and real quickly, Ed, I guess for average voters or average people who are watching this, why should they care? And wrap this up in 30 seconds.
Why should they care? It's because if your employer has to spend more money replacing people who are out on workers' compensation care that is dragging on for longer and longer, that's less they can hire spending on new employees, on your raises, or on your training. So this affects all the employees, whether they're injured or not.
Ed, we gotta run. We've covered a lot of ground today, from construction defects to recessionary fears to the latest legislative battles. We really aim to keep you informed, to make sure you're engaged, and to help you stay ahead of the game. So be sure to stay tuned for future business buzzes to make sure you understand what's happening in our business community, how it affects you and our economy. For 9 News, for my partner Ed Sealover, I'm Ryan Frazier. Until next time.